Red banners flashed across television screens worldwide. News anchors, their faces grim, delivered the stunning alert. An emergency of unprecedented scale was unfolding. Initial reports were fragmented. Confusion reigned. Few understood the true gravity. Most continued their day, unaware. The information, however, was stark. Something terrible was happening. This was not a drill. This was not a localized crisis. The world was on notice.
In Dhaka, the abstract news became brutally real. Sirens began to scream, a piercing, unending wail. People poured into the streets, their faces etched with fear. They ran, seeking safety that was nowhere apparent. The air filled with shouts and the distant thud of unknown origins. Dust kicked up by panicked feet mingled with a growing haze. Chaos erupted in the usually bustling capital of Bangladesh. The sounds of the city transformed into a symphony of terror. This was not just news, it was immediate visceral danger.
Across the globe, New York City experienced its own shock. The familiar skyline was suddenly scarred by the dark shapes of fighter jets. They streaked low and fast over Manhattan. Their engines thundered, a deafening roar that vibrated through buildings. Pedestrians stopped, mouths agape, staring upwards. Tourists fumbled with cameras, then slowly lowered them. This was no air show. This was a military presence, urgent and menacing. The jets were a clear signal of profound instability. The pieces began to connect in the global consciousness. Dhaka, New York. Other cities were reporting similar disturbances. This was not a series of isolated incidents. The scale pointed to something coordinated. A chilling realization dawned upon those watching, those listening. The fragile peace that had held for decades was shattering. Fear, cold and sharp, spread like a contagion. The world held its breath, bracing for the unknown, yet dreading the inevitable. The initial stages of a global conflagration were igniting. Deep within reinforced bunkers, world leaders convened. High-technology war rooms buzzed with a frantic energy. Massive screens displayed the cascading global chaos. Red icons blinked, indicating new points of crisis. The faces of presidents, prime ministers, and generals were pale. They were under immense pressure. The information flowed relentlessly. Each update was worse than the last. These leaders held the fate of billions in their hands. The weight of imminent, catastrophic decisions was crushing. Panic, raw and undisguised, began to seep into the command centers. Voices, usually measured, became sharp and strained. Urgent, shouted conversations echoed through the rooms. Telephones rang incessantly, connecting to other panicked capitals. Attempts at de-escalation were failing. Diplomatic channels were breaking down. The systems designed to prevent such a moment were proving inadequate. The leaders were trapped, watching a horrifying future unfold moment by moment. They were witnessing the failure of an entire global order.
An unsettling sound began to permeate the tense atmosphere. It started faintly, almost subliminally. Then it grew in volume and clarity. An Islamic-style chant, rhythmic and powerful, filled the airwaves. It seemed to emanate from an unknown source, broadcast globally. This was accompanied by a distinct Middle Eastern soundscape. War drums pulsed beneath the chanting. The auditory overlay added a deeply disturbing layer to the unfolding visual horror. It felt ancient, yet terrifyingly current.
Allahu Akbar, it declared. God is greater. The phrase repeated each time with more intensity. Time itself seemed to warp. Seconds stretched into agonizing eternities. The world leaders listened, frozen. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to do. The final, irrevocable moments were ticking away. The declaration was a war cry, a final precursor to unimaginable destructive power. The first flash was blinding. It erased the sky. Then came another, and another, across continents. Cities, once vibrant centers of human life, became targets. The predictions of strategists, the fears of generations, materialized in pillars of fire. Nuclear detonations, swift and merciless, announced the new age. The destructive capacity of humankind was unleashed. There was no turning back. The world was irrevocably scarred by these initial strikes. These were not tactical, limited exchanges. This was a full-scale assault. Massive mushroom clouds, iconic and terrifying, billowed upwards. They climbed miles into the atmosphere, carrying radioactive death. The sheer force of the explosions obliterated everything at ground zero. Structures vanished. Life ceased. The Earth itself shuddered under the impacts. Shockwaves radiated outwards, flattening anything in their path. The heat generated was intense, incinerating vast areas instantaneously. The scale of destruction was beyond human comprehension, yet it was happening. This was the terrible calculus of nuclear war. Instantly, darkness fell. Not the darkness of night, but an artificial, absolute blackness. Power grids across the globe, overloaded or destroyed, collapsed in unison. A global blackout enveloped the planet. Cities, towns, and countryside were plunged into an unyielding void of light. Electronic communications ceased. The intricate web of modern technology, so vital to society, was severed. Humanity was thrust back into a primal state of isolation and fear. The silence that followed the loss of power was profound and deeply unsettling. The visual aftermath was a macabre spectacle. Eerie cinematic lighting painted the scenes of devastation. The orange glow of raging fires pulsed against impenetrable black shadows. Dense smoke from burning cities choked the air, blotting out even the memory of a blue sky. Dust from pulverized buildings and earth, kicked high by the blasts, began to mix with this smoke. In arid regions, massive sandstorms were whipped up by the atmospheric disturbances. The skies turned a permanent, ominous dark gray. The world was now a landscape of unimaginable horror. The initial cataclysmic nuclear exchanges subsided. What remained was a new, terrifying reality. The air itself felt different, heavy and tainted. It carried the invisible threat of radioactive fallout. This silent killer would claim millions more in the days, weeks, and years to come. Survival became the only imperative for those who had lived through the first moments. The carefully constructed edifice of civilization had crumbled into radioactive dust and debris. The visual torment persisted. Thick, acrid smoke continued to pour from the skeletons of cities. It hung like a pall over entire continents. Sandstorms, born from the altered climate and blast effects, raged across once fertile plains. They buried everything in their path under layers of grit. The sun, if it could be seen at all, was a dim, distorted disk through the haze. A perpetual, gloomy twilight settled over the earth. This was the nuclear winter, long theorized, now brutally manifest. The human cost was incalculable. Billions were feared dead or dying. The immediate blasts, the searing heat, the crushing shockwaves, and the insidious radiation took their toll. For the survivors, life became a desperate struggle. Food and clean water were scarce. Medical aid was non-existent. Law and order vanished. Small groups huddled together, driven by the primal instinct to endure. The intricate systems that supported modern life were gone. Chaos reigned supreme. The screens which once showed breaking news, then panic, then explosions, finally faded to complete black. A profound silence descended for a moment, the silence of a world holding its last breath.
Then from the darkness, a loud, disembodied voice echoed. It was deep, resonant, and utterly final. It carried no emotion, only stark pronouncement. World War III has begun. There was no ambiguity. There was no hope offered. Only the cold, hard statement of this new, terrible epic.